Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, and the big moment has finally arrived. We can now talk about... Oh my goodness! This bench-pressing object, the Arthur Grumiaux Complete Phillips Recordings on Decca edition. Yes, whatever we choose to call it. Here it is, because we have resolved the issue of the missing Beethoven Concerto, the mystery of the missing Beethoven Concerto. So let's get right to the answer, and then we'll get to talk about the giant cube. Oh, I'm so excited that we finally got this done, and I'm very, very pleased. I really have to give credit to Decca for jumping on top of this as soon as word came out and arranging to fix the issue. They really deserve credit for doing that, because nobody's perfect, mistakes happen, and they cared enough to be responsive, and that is a big deal. Let me tell you, folks, it really, really is. So I heard from the catalog manager at Decca, Mr. Edward Weston, yesterday. He writes, "Dear David, I can confirm replacement discs are now in stock and are being sent out this week. We've sent a message out on our Facebook page today. Notice this has been shared quite a bit already, so hopefully the news will reach people. Of course, retailers have been notified too. If anyone is having some difficulty with sourcing a replacement CD, they should reach out to us at info@decca.com. You can see it down below there, and we'll respond as quickly as we can." He also adds, and this is a little bit of insider info I hope you're all excited about, as am I saw your video from last week. Thanks for getting the message out. I also stumbled across your reviews of Dvorak cello concerto recordings. It just so happens we do plan to release a Heinrich Schiff edition later this year. A wonderful soloist. All the best. So yes, not only do we get the Grumiaux edition fixed, but we get a Heinrich Schiff edition. So thank you, Decca. That's just marvelous news, I think. It really is. So that's the answer. If you have a problem, you go to info@decca.com or whatever that thing was that I put down there, and hopefully they will fix it. Now, I have to tell you, if you go to their Facebook page and look, you'll see in the comments that Amazon is already impossible to deal with. It doesn't make any difference that they have a replacement CD. Amazon and these giganto online sources, they're not going to be able to do anything about it. The smaller retailers, or the independent ones, the ones who are still like specializing in selling records, like Presto and some of these other people, they should be able to deal with it. You should work through them. But if you can't, there is a number or an email address at Decca that you can reach. Please reach out to them. And if you have an issue, feel free to reach out to me, because I will be more than happy to run interference on this stuff and make sure that you all get satisfaction. I really think it's important. I think it's very good that they did this, but just as important that they follow through and that everybody gets what they paid for. I will say one other thing, however. If you're missing that disc 45 and you don't want to wait, and there are a few little tricky alternatives you can do if you're not too finicky about what you get, because disc number 45 existed previously on a couple Phillips reissues. One of them was a Festivo reissue. The Beethoven Concerto alone, without the two romances, was reissued on Pentatone, coupled with something that was like the Brook Concerto or something. It was another whole concerto on there. And you could also get it. I happen to have this one sitting around. This was, remember that terrible little sub-label Penguin Classics that had those really bizarre liner notes? Ooh, boy, they were weird. Well, that exact disc 45 is right here. It's the Grumiaux Beethoven Violin Concerto and the two romances with the new Philharmonia Orchestra under Ado de Wart in the romances, and the Concertgebouw Orchestra with Colin Davis for the concerto. And there it is. So you could take this out, throw it away, stuff it in the box, and you're just as far ahead. That's a possible solution as well, in case you're wondering. I happen to be very picky. I want the original one. So if you're listening, Mr. Weston, you can send me my replacement disc anytime now, please. But in the meantime, let's talk about the disc, this set, whose only other annoyance that I could see is the fact that it's one of these things. So if you pick it up by the sides, be careful that the bottom does not drop out and you don't like break your toe or have a mess to clean up on your floor. So take the top off, and we have the book. It's not a hardcover, but it's still a rather nice book with lots of album covers and original photos and things like that, which is delightful. And you get the CDs arranged thusly in this kind of like, cross-hatched pattern. And it's actually quite convenient to access all of this stuff. There are 74 CDs. And we are going to go through, no, we're not going to go through every one of them. I'm just kidding. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the work list in this, because that's the only way to do this and be done with it tonight. And I think that will give you a really great sense of what's inside and, Grumiaux's range as an artist. But first, I want to make a few observations about Grumiaux himself, which I think are really important. People ask me, well, should I get the box? Duh. Of course you should get the box if you want great violin playing. Grumiaux was one of the all-time great violinists in the history of violinishness, and he was the greatest pure, I would say, exponent of the Franco-Belgian school of violin playing. Now, the Franco-Belgian school sort of traces its way all the way back down sort of to Viotti, the classical violinist Viotti, who was a friend and teacher of Bayeux in France and the Conservatoire in Paris, and that whole crew who went out thence through the 19th century. And they were people like Berriot, de Berriot, whatever his name was, Berriot, the Berriot guy, and Vieuxtemps, and Isai, and Sarasate was one of those guys. Chrysler was one of them. Carl Flesch was one of them. These were all people who adopted certain technical aspects of violin playing, like, how you leave your bow arm, whether it looks like a chicken wing or whether it looks like, something that's about to kill somebody, and whether you stick the violin here and hold it down here, all the way up here like this, like you're about to get whiplash, and how you hold the bow and the way you do bowie things like this, and of course how you use vibrato, whether you do it with your finger, just like your little finger like this, or whether you do it with your wrist like this, or whether you do it with your whole arm or your whole body like this, you can. Anyway, these are all technicalities of violin playing. Some people feel very strongly about them, vibrato being one of them. But the Franco-Belgian school was the school that gave us modern continuous, which is never continuous, but that's what they call it, continuous vibrato. And that was a good thing, folks. I'm telling you, not that I'm a fan of vibrato. I actually don't like too much vibrato, but I think it should be freely available to be used as the range of expression of music increased throughout the 19th century. So the range of vibrato had to increase to suit the music that was being composed for the instrument. It's really that simple. It shouldn't be a big deal argument. Nobody would argue that the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto requires less vibrato than a Vivaldi concerto. You know what I mean? You got to do what the music tells you to do, so you need to have the freedom to do what the music tells you to do. And that the Franco-Belgian school gave us. The German violin school did not so much, frankly. That was the school of Spohr and what's his name, Joachim, and those people. And also, when you come right down to it, it was the Franco-Belgian school that had the most influence timbrally, not so much in technique and bowing and position and all that stuff, but timbrally on the Russian school as well, of Leopold Auer and his students. And it was really a very, very, very influential bunch of people and left us many, many great violinists. But the 20th century avatar of that school, and really the last who could be said to be representative of a school as opposed to simply a teacher or a conservatory or something, was Grumiaux. And Grumiaux actually died at the ripe young age of 65, which was really, really tragic. He was born in 1921. He died in 1986, and very suddenly and unexpectedly. On the one hand, that was tragic because he was only 65. On the other hand, he died literally at the height of his powers. And so there are no bad Grumiaux recordings. Once he was mature, and he was great, and he stayed great. I mean, it was a tragedy that he wanted to record, for example, the Sibelius Concerto. He never got around to it. There were so many more works he could have done. But when you think about it, these recordings were made from the early 1950s, like 1952, 53, somewhere around there, up until basically the time he died. So you're talking about what, 30, 35 years of performance and 76 CDs worth of, 74 CDs, pardon me, worth of stuff. That is a lot of recording. Truly a huge amount of recording. And the repertoire is very, very interesting. You know, Grumiaux had a reputation as an aristocratic player. That meant someone of elevated taste, and he did have elevated taste. He also had elevated taste in music, I might add. But he was actually a working class guy. He came from a poor family, and it just goes to show, it's a wonderful reminder that the great composers were not aristocratic, not in the least. They were working class people. They were, in the classical period, they were servants. Really, up until the end of the monarchies at the end of the 19th century, they were servants. They were in the employ of the wealthy, and they were working class people. And I think that's very, very important to keep in mind when classical music people get all snotty about the repertoire and how wonderful they are because they listen to it. You remember that the people who wrote this stuff were normal. Well, no, they were composers. They weren't normal, and they were crazy musicians. You know what I mean. But you know what I mean. They were not snotty, obnoxious aristocrats who thought that the world owed them. They were hardworking grunts. Bottom line. And Grumiaux, you don't want to think of him as a hardworking grunt, but he was a hardworking grunt. He worked very, very hard. He was a wonderful pianist. You get a couple recordings here where he plays violin sonatas with himself on the piano, thanks to a little overdubbing, which is kind of cute. There's a Brahms and a Mozart sonata in there where he does that, and I think that's fascinating. He was an amazingly gifted musician. And that's something that you're just born with. It doesn't matter what class you come from or how rich you are. So Grumiaux had a reputation as an artist of tremendous taste and scrupulous, fastidious musicianship and a virtuosity that never drew attention to itself, that was always just tossed off with naturalness and ease. And that's what makes all his recordings so beautiful, and which actually is the reason they've survived. I mean, why they've lasted so long. It's almost like Zell's recordings, of Beethoven and Brahms. They're just so strong on basic musical values: clean rhythm, beautiful phrasing, tasteful everything, but tasteful not in an inhibited and obsessive or self-regarding narcissistic kind of way. Tasteful in the sense of naturalness, ease, inevitability, the kind of things that really withstand the test of time. So yes, you should have this box if you care about great violin playing and you want the music that's in here. And one of the things you'll see is that Grumiaux was actually, in his way, a very, very forward-looking and adventuresome violinist, not because he played modern music, but because he played early music. And a lot of it for a violin of his character, a violin of his caliber, a violinist of his caliber. And the other thing that he did, which I think was really extraordinary, was his devotion. I mean, real devotion to chamber music, to making recordings of chamber music and making recordings of a lot of interesting chamber music. The only other really major violinist who was that dedicated to chamber music was Isaac Stern, who gets also very little credit for being the splendid chamber music musician that he was, and for his ability to play chamber music as the first among equals without overwhelming or drawing attention to himself in a non-chambery sort of way. I mean, yes, there were other violinists who played a lot of chamber music. For example, Heifetz, the Heifetz Piatigorsky concert. But that's kind of like chamber music for bullies, if you know what I mean. People with outsized personalities showing their stuff. But those interpretations, some of them are fascinating, and some of them are brilliant, and some of them are just kind of weird because of the lopsided balances, either for the violin or the cello, and the piano is somewhere in another county, usually. Not always, not when they had Rubinstein. Then you had three guys who really knew how to do it together. But as often as not. You never have that issue with Grumiaux. Grumiaux was absolutely at home in chamber music and happy to take a back seat when the music required it. And his chamber music recordings also remain reference recordings in a lot of this repertoire. So I've been blabbing for 15 minutes and I haven't even talked about the 74 discs. So we're going to go through this quickly. And I'm going to tell you basically what's in here and then turn you off on your way. Hopefully you'll get the set with the correct number 45, Beethoven Violin Concerto with Colin Davis instead of Alceo Galliera. If you already have the set, however, then get your replacement and just enjoy this wonderful, wonderful music making by one of the truly great musicians of the 20th century. So what do we have? Well, I think I may avoid the little sniglet things. Let's not talk about those, because you know those violin recitals where they do transcriptions in Chrysler, there's a Chrysler bit and there's all that stuff. Little, fire dances and cute little snoogey thingies. And, I hate those records. I really do. I mean, sometimes they're very well done. He plays them beautifully. I couldn't care less. I like real meaty stuff, and I'll bet you do too. Szigeti talked about how back in the day, that's what violinists did. To play a complete sonata was almost unheard of. And it really is kind of shocking to our sensibilities today. And some of these things are delightful. They really are. They can be. But I'm going to give you the meat, the real meat, the red meat, dripping red meat stuff. So Bach. Oh, Bach. Lots of Bach. Well, you get the Bach Violin Concertos. You get the sonatas and partitas for solo violin, one of the great sets of the sonatas and partitas for solo violin. In fact, before Milstein remade his set, Grumiaux was probably the one to get, and it still is one of the ones to get. It didn't get worse because Milstein remade his on DG. And then you get all the Bach violin sonatas, and these are all with different accompanists, but the violin sonatas are with Christiane Jacotet. She was wonderful. And, his pianists were generally very good. Some of them were amazingly good. But, in the earlier music, you get, what was Robert Véron-Lacroix and a couple other people, serious early music people of the day. So you get all this Bach stuff. And there's also a transcription of the Concerto BWV 1060, which was the two harpsichord concerto. It's with oboe and violin with Heinz Holliger. I mean, this is all first-class stuff. And some of this stuff, of course, he did more than once. Like there are two recordings of the double violin concerto, one with Hermann Krebers, which is quite wonderful. And let's see, violin concerto numbers 1 and 2, you get 3 times each. There's a certain amount of duplication here. Then we get to Beethoven. Now, Beethoven, this is rather fascinating. The Grumiaux trio does the string trios wonderfully. I mean, you don't get it better than that. Then, of course, you have 2 versions of the serenades, which are coupled to 3 versions of the violin concerto. Now, the versions of the violin concerto, the first one is the really important one because it's the one with Edward von Beinum, the motto one in the Concertgebouw. Oh, wow, is it great. And he also did the Brahms with von Beinum. Those are classic recordings, but the other ones that he remade are just as good. And really nifty, you get the violin sonatas, all of them with Clara Haskell, a completely reference version-worthy set. And then he remade most of them, but he didn't finish them with Claudio Arrau, which also is not too shabby. And the 2 pianists are very, very different. So it's fascinating to compare them. Then you have the Berg Violin Concerto with Markievicz and the Concertgebouw, which didn't make my list of Berg Violin Concerto recordings. So I thought I'd wait and talk about it here. It very easily could have. It's splendid. And let's see, Berlioz's Reverie and Caprice, some more little sniggy things. Brahms. Oh, yes, Brahms. Okay, so you get the horn trio, and you get the violin concerto twice. Yes, the von Beinum, and then the Colin Davis with the New Philharmonia. And then you get the 3 violin sonatas, one of them with Grumiaux playing his own piano part. Number 2, he does actually, accompanying himself. And the pianist is Georgi Sibok, who's just wonderful. And then you get the Bruch Scottish Fantasy, and you get the first violin concerto 3 times, once again. And the Chausson Poème twice. These are with the Lamoureux Orchestra. And of course, I love these French orchestras. So these Lamoureux recordings with Manuel Rosenthal or Jean Fournet, and they're just wonderful to hear. Corelli. You get the complete violin sonatas, Opus 5. That's really, really cool. I mean, that's really just great. Who was doing those things then? Until Grumiaux came along, major modern violinist, virtuoso type, doing a complete set of 12 Corelli sonatas. That was a big deal, that release. It came out in 1975. But those pieces weren't all that well known, certainly not among major violinists. So that's just phenomenal. Then you get the Debussy Violin Sonata twice, and you get, his basic accompanist for a lot of this stuff was Istvan Hajdu, who was perfectly fine, very, very good. Then you have some short hujis. And then Fauré, you get his violin sonatas, both of them. The first one twice, these are such beautiful works. The Fauré violin sonatas are one of music's great forgotten treasures. And to hear Grumiaux do them, it doesn't get better than that, folks. It does not. Then two versions of the Franck violin sonata. And let's see, Gounod, Bach, Granados, Grieg. You get his violin sonata number 3, twice, of course. And then a bunch of Handel violin sonatas with Véron-Lacroix on the harpsichord. That's really great. Handel, wow. Again, who was doing it? Then a bunch of Haydn string trios, none of which are authentic or by Haydn, but it doesn't matter. It was the thought that counts with the Grumiaux trio. And you get 2 Haydn violin concertos. Again, at a time when no one was, certainly major violinists were playing Haydn violin concertos, forget it. And a Michael Haydn violin concerto, all with the Concertgebouw Orchestra and Edo de Wart on those, and Raymond Lepard. His name was really Leopard, but I won't say that because I'm not going to call him a leopard. Lepard is so much better. There was a whole controversy when I was younger about, what his real name was. At some point in his career, I think he changed the way it was pronounced. It doesn't matter. Nobody knew. So you get your choice. So I don't want to hear it from any of you, what his real name was or how he really wanted it. I don't care. It's too bad. The change happened at some point in my lifetime. I'm not conscious of exactly which way it went. But he was a wonderful conductor in this stuff. Remember, he was like a Handel expert and all that. He did good Baroque music in the older pre-authentic instrument style. Then there's a Chrysler disc. 2 versions of the Lalo Symphony Espagnole. Oh, God, one of the pieces I hate more than anything, because as I've said before, I was once trapped playing snare drum in the finale. It's like a torment. Da 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 schnock. Da 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 schnock. Da 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 schnock. Horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. But you get the 4-movement version and the 5-movement version. And the 4-movement, they're both with the Lamoureux Orchestra. One is under Jean Fournier and the other under Manuel Rosenthal. And if I'm going to hear the Symphonie Espagnole, that's how I want to hear it. It's wonderfully trashy. It really is. And then let's see, you get a couple of Leclerc violin sonatas and the Guillaume Lecoy violin sonata in G, which is a major work. Really a major work. Sometimes it's coupled with the Franck. You should really hear the Lecoy. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Let's see, the Massenet Meditation from Thais. See, we're already up to M. Mendelssohn, the early violin concerto in D minor. That's a wonderful thing to have. And then you get 3 versions of the big deal E minor violin concerto. 3, count them. 1, 2, 3. There you go. Now, Mozart. You got to pause and take a breath. Mozart. Grumiaux discovered Mozart as a composer for the violin. He was the first violinist to record all 5 violin concertos. Actually, he did another one. There's 6. There's a couple that you could derive from the serenades and whatnot, but he did all of them, and he did them all twice, which is like pretty extraordinary. But aside from that, and the Sinfonia Concertante for violin and viola, but doing all the Mozart violin concertos and doing them so well, he is still the reference. His set with Colin Davis, it's still a reference in the Mozart violin concertos. It really is, because he had the natural affinity for that kind of music, the taste, the musicianship, and the ability, and this is what really matters. Period instrument people, take note. The ability not to make the music sound too small, too restrained, too inhibited. It was beautiful, vocal, singing, rapturous Mozart, which is, Mozart is all those things. And so many people forget, in their rush to play the music a certain way and follow certain rules, they forget what the music is expressing. And Grumiaux never forgot what the music was expressing. And he also did, let's see, oh my God, yes, of course, the Divertimento for string trio in E-flat, the greatest work ever written for string trio, with the Grumiaux trio, and all of these string quintets, another reference set. And he did the flute quartets. I mean, he did all kinds of Mozart stuff here. 6 preludes and fugues after Bach. He did, the concert rondos, and he did, some variation thingies. Really, I mean, Mozart is a violin guy. I'm telling you, it's really, really astonishing. And a whole slew of violin sonatas, many of them twice, with either, get this, Clara Haskell, which makes them amazing, of course. And, some of her discography was rather scanty, so the stuff that she did is just as valuable for her as it is for Grumiaux. Or Walter Klein, who I call Walter Klein because I'm not calling him Mr. Clean. I refuse to call him Mr. Clean. He is Maestro Clean. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in English. I'm sorry, folks. He's a Klein, and he'll have to deal with that. But he was, of course, a Mozart specialist as well. Magnificent. So that really, the Mozart alone, the complete Grumiaux Mozart, is a gift. A gift to Western civilization. Let's not forget. And now, let's see, what else have we got here? He did some Pergolesi. Oh, my goodness. Well, it's an arrangement. And Manuel Ponce and Paganini. Oh, the 2 violin concertos, numbers 1 and 4. And a bunch of other little short goodies, a trio of short goodies. And he did Ravel. He did the violin sonata, which is very nice. And then he did the Pièce en forme de habanera. Remember that, right? And then, of course, 2 versions. Count them, 2 versions. 3 versions. Oh, my God. 3 versions of Tzigana. 1 with piano with Istvan Haidú, and 2 with orchestra, both the L'Amoureux. Again, Fournet and Rosenthal. We all know what record that was on. It came with the Lalo Symphony Espagnole. And I still think that Tzigana is Ravel's worst piece of music. And one of the worst things ever written for the violin. Ever. I know some of you chimed in and talked about how much you loved it. You're more than welcome to love it. Ugh, it makes me shudder. And Saint-Saëns. Oh, wow. This is wonderful stuff, too. You have 2 of each of these things. The Havanaise, the introduction Rondo Capriccioso, and, of course, the 3rd violin concerto, all with L'Amoureux and you-know-who, both times. And then Sarazate's Zigeunerweisen. Gotta have that. Schubert. He did a lot of Schubert. You get the, the rondo thing, the really cool rondo thing, and the late rondo, the rondo for violin and strings. Oh, that's earlier, pardon me. The, where is this thing? The concert rondo? No, never mind me. The rondo for violin and strings. Okay, that's D438, I think, or something like that. But you also get the great string quintet in C major. You get the string trios, the 2 string trios with the Grumiaux trio, and you get the 4 violin sonatas. 3 of them, remember, were called sonatinas because they're kind of short, but they're wonderful, beautiful, beautiful pieces. And you get the duo for violin and piano, which is also, Schubert called it a sonata. For some reason, later generations called it a duo. Unfortunately, he never recorded the Fantasy in C, which tells us something about, the lamentable reputation of that piece, which I don't understand because I think it's a sublime masterpiece, and I'm going to do a separate talk about it. And soon, believe you me, Schubert's music for violin and piano is magnificent, and it deserves some separate attention, and it's going to get it. So stay tuned. And then we have, Schumann's stuff from Schumann, Sibelius, Stravinsky Violin Concerto. Oh yeah, the Concerto Orchestra under Ernest Bohr. Yes, one of the great recordings of that work. And some Svensson, a little Svensson thingy, and some Tartini and Tchaikovsky. The Serenade Melancholique, 2 versions of that. And, oh my God, the Violin Concerto, 3 versions of that. Holy cow, including the Concertgebouw with Haitink. I mean, this is just great stuff. It's really great stuff. And then, and look at this, Telemann, the 12 fantasies for violin without bass, the solo violin fantasies. I mean, Grumiaux, he put these pieces on the map. I mean, I know everybody goes for like his Bach partitas. Get the Telemann. Listen to the Telemann. First of all, they're delightful pieces. Absolutely delightful. And I have to be honest, I'm not usually a fan of unaccompanied violin music. I mean, to me, it's almost inherently kind of timbrally fatiguing after too long a time. I can't listen to the Bach pieces, more than one at a go. I can listen to them individually, but to play like all of them, as some psychotic people do. And it's the same thing with the cello things. I remember when Yo-Yo Ma at Carnegie Hall, did all the Bach cello suites in one concert. I mean, if that is not a suicidal, wrist-slashing type event, I don't know what is. I really don't. But these Telemann fantasies are phenomenal, wonderfully inventive pieces and delightful. And if Baroque music annoys you because of the harpsichord going blinkety, blinkety, blink underneath everything, listen to this stuff. It's like the Bach. I mean, it has that mastery of melody and linearity and implied harmony. It's just so cool. So then we're already on V. He did a bunch of Veracini sonatas and Vieux Temps, Violin Concertos 4 and 5, which are like his really good ones. They're very nice. And the Viotti Violin Concerto number 22 in A minor. I said before, Viotti was a good composer. He really was. And although I know he wrote 20 some odd violin concertos, they're really very enjoyable. They are the classical period pile of violin concertos, like Haydn's pile of symphonies or Mozart's pile of piano concertos. If you want the classical style in a violin concerto, listen to Viotti. There's a lot of good stuff there. And number 22, the A minor concerto, is really first class. It really is. It's sort of like a mature Mozart violin concerto. It's just wonderful. And then, let's see, Vivaldi. There's basically two Vivaldi things. There's a Four Seasons, and with Les Soloistes Romandes under somebody, because I can't see. Never mind, it doesn't matter who. And then there's a rather nice disc of miscellaneous violin concertos with the Staatskapelle Dresden and Vittorio Negri, which is really quite lovely, and some Wieniawski stuff. Fortunately, no full concertos. You get the Legend, which is lovely, and the Souvenir de Moscou, which is tremendous fun. One of those is orchestral, one of those is the piano thing with István Hajdú. And finally, a little bit by Isai, Rêve d'enfant. Yes, right? Rêve d'enfant, yeah, the dream of a child, opus something or other. And that is it from A to Y. And that is one heck of a collection. But one thing I want to emphasize again and point out, look at the quantity of early music, of music that Grumiaux really dug up and played in such a stylish, idiomatic way. Idiomatic, I mean expressively, and with an impeccable technique and a beautiful feeling for the aesthetics of the period. Nobody sits around and says, "Oh well, Grumiaux's Corelli is anachronistic because it doesn't use a curved bow or catgut," or you just can't say that about his early music performances. They're just as good as anything else he did, and they feel just as natural. And it goes to tell us that great music, first of all, permits of, as we all know, numerous interpretive approaches, but that musicianship, true musicianship, is more than a collection of prescriptions, of recipes, of do it this way, push button A, then put in part B, and then do this way, and go blink like. It's not. Musicianship is about timbre and phrasing and accent and shaping and pacing and projection of the long line and understanding of structure. And all of those things are so completely independent of the quotidienne mechanics of how the music is physically played. Grumiaux had those mechanics completely under his fingers. They're not an issue. They're not an issue. You don't think about it when he's playing. You just hear the music. And there can be no higher compliment than that. So do get your Grumiaux edition. Make sure you get the correct Beethoven. And keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me. Take care.